Merry Christmas. My name is John, and I'm just here to discuss movies on the YT. And if you'd like to join that discussion, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and hit that notification bell as well. And it's Christmas, so I decided to rank two franchises together, combined ranking of Die Hard and Lethal Weapon. Both of the original movies set around Christmas time, and they're great action movies, and they got pretty good franchises. That being said, one of these franchises is one of my all-time favorites, with one of my all-time favorite action franchises. I love it. I'm a fan of all of the movies. One of the franchises, the other franchise is just a franchise that I think has a couple undeniably great movies, but the franchise as a whole I don't really care that much about. And you might already know which one is which if you checked out my top 10 Christmas movies video. But anyway, they're still both great franchises, and I just felt like ranking them both together. That equals 9 movies, 5 Die Hard movies, 4 Lethal Weapon movies, and this, I might have a pretty controversial top 3, and so let's get started. Coming in last place at number 9, pretty easily for me, is A Good Day to Die Hard. This just kind of feels like a VOD action movie, a direct-to-video action movie that stars Bruce Willis. He's done a lot of VOD action movies within the last decade, and this just kind of feels like another one of those. I don't necessarily think as a VOD action movie it's a terrible movie, but as like a theatrically released movie within a popular franchise, it's pretty bad. You know, it's just, there's not really any depth to most of the characters outside of stuff you've seen in previous movies with Bruce Willis's character, and just the action scenes in general, they're pretty generic VOD action stuff with quite a bit of CGI, like helicopter sequences and stuff. That being said, I do have a positive, and that is, I think Jai Courtney works as John McClane's son in this movie, and I kind of like seeing Jai McCourtney in these types of action movies, and so that is one positive I will give it. That being said, Bruce Willis's performance, it's by far the worst performance out of this franchise. Not his worst performance ever, but in terms of this franchise, it's the worst. And coming in at number 8 for me is Live Free or Die Hard. I don't think this is a bad movie. I think it's pretty well made. I just don't entirely enjoy the cast, mainly because I love Justin Long, but I just don't think this is his genre. He felt a little out of place to me, and I don't think he had very much chemistry with Bruce Willis. You know, Kevin Smith felt a little out of place as well. He's much more of a comedian type, a comedic actor and director even, but in terms of this movie, he felt a little out of tone even, and out of place. And Bruce Willis, I don't think he does that bad in this movie. It's just from a personal point of view, I much prefer seeing 90s Bruce Willis than I do like this 2000s Bruce Willis. And so that knocks it back a little bit for me. That being said, there's some nice executed action scenes and vehicular action scenes and just some nice action scenes in general. And the plot itself is something that usually kind of intrigues me, the whole anarchist hacker thing. That being said, I do think it's a little too ambitious for this franchise, because the first Die Hard was a building, the second Die Hard was an airport, the third Die Hard was a city. This basically goes to country and maybe even the world. And just overall, I think it's too ambitious for this franchise. I think this franchise was built upon being within like a more contained area, and this just kind of throws that part of the franchise out the window. And coming in at number 7, I have Lethal Weapon 3. Now, I think this is a really good movie. I enjoy watching it whenever I want to binge watch Lethal Weapon, which, in my opinion, is actually one of the best binge movie watches there is. I still watch this one and I still enjoy watching it. But I think they kind of went too dark with Murtaugh's storyline. I get kind of the social commentary thing that they were trying to do with it, but overall, I just think they went a little too dark with it, with him having to like kill a young boy and stuff, and then him becoming kind of drunk or drinking his problems away on the boat and stuff. I think they went a little too dark with his character. Overall, I think this movie is just kind of out of tone in a lot of areas, especially with Murtaugh's storyline. You have, like I mentioned, the darker storyline, but there's also like this gag with this armored truck driving lady who has a crush on him and stuff. And so you have a very comedic element and a somewhat dark element to his story, and they don't mix them that well, and it just feels out of tone. And coming in at number 6, I have Die Hard 2, Die Harder. Now, I was actually expecting this to be lower on the list because I don't remember liking it all that much, but I kind of enjoyed it this time around a lot more than I have previously. And I do think this does a decent job continuing on the McClane's storyline because it involves his wife and it even takes elements from like the reporter from the first movie and stuff. I think they have a nice element there with the storytelling, and I think the airport setting is a nice setting for a Die Hard movie. That being said, there are elements that I found fairly predictable in it, and I wasn't a fan of some of the security guard characters. I found them a little annoying at times. And the main thing with this one is I just don't find it as memorable as Die Hard or Die Hard with a Vengeance. And so it does knock it back for me within the Die Hard ranking. So coming in at number 5 is Lethal Weapon 4. Now this is the Lethal Weapon movie with the worst Rotten Tomatoes score. But personally, I think it has some out-of-tone moments, but it's always because it's being cheesy and not necessarily trying to balance a very comedic storyline with a darker storyline like the third movie did. This one just has some cheese in it, and it's kind of like the same cheese you'd get in some like Hong Kong martial arts movies because the storyline revolves around like the Chinese triad and stuff. And I just think it provides some nice fight sequences, some nice action in it. And I think the storyline itself is very good because it basically takes Murtaugh's story from all the previous 3 episodes of him being too old for this stuff and puts it also onto Martin Riggs. And I just think it provides a nice dynamic for this movie. And coming in at number 4 is Die Hard with a Vengeance. Now, this is a movie that I was expecting to love a lot when I first saw it. And don't get me wrong, it's a great action movie. It's a great 90s action movie, great Bruce Willis movie, great Samuel L. Jackson movie. And I think this goes as far as you could go with the Die Hard formula, with it being contained within a city. Because I think you go more than a city, and it kind of loses the Die Hard effect of being within a contained area. What really elevates this one for me is the acting. You know, Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson have a very nice dynamic between the two. I think Jeremy Irons, I believe, gives a great performance. And I do think this one has some nice social stuff in it as well with Samuel L. Jackson's character. It's mostly kind of comments and one-liners he makes that reference like real issues in the world. And I think that's a nice little thing to throw in there without going too serious with it. You still highlight stuff like that. And so I think that adds a nice element to this movie as well. One thing that does hold it back is I just, for some reason, wasn't too invested in the actual storyline. I just enjoyed being with the characters and going through their adventure, but the actual storyline itself, I didn't have too much interest in personally. And so now we're in the top 3, and I feel like this is where I'm going to differ the most from a lot of people. And that is because coming in at number 3 is Die Hard, the original Die Hard. Now, this is an undeniably great film. I'm never going to argue the fact that this is a great action movie and one of the best action movies of the 80s. I'll never deny that. And Bruce Willis gives an amazing performance in it, as well as Alan Rickman as Hans Gruber. They both do amazing jobs. The one thing that holds this back for me is just an interest factor. And it might sound somewhat contradictory because I used it as a criticism against Live Free or Die Hard. But that is the concept itself. While I think it works very well, and I prefer this franchise to stick to the contained storylines, it also kind of limits it a little bit. While I think it's the best thing for this franchise to do, it limits my enjoyment of the franchise, if that makes sense. Because this movie just kind of feels like an awesomely executed, but still it feels like a bottle episode of a movie, if that makes sense. Because it's so contained, you don't get like this big, you don't get like an adventure or like a detective type of storyline or anything like that. It's just kind of, he's stuck in the building and he has to weave around stuff or whatever. He's just kind of stuck in the building and he has to, like, one by one take out people, and they do a great job with that. It's just something that kind of limits my enjoyment. Plus, it's not a movie that necessarily hit me. It's a movie that when I first watched it, I thought it was very well made, executed, and a great movie. It just didn't hit me personally in the same way that the top 2 movies on this list hit me. And coming in at number 2, I have Lethal Weapon 2. I think this is a great follow-up of Lethal Weapon. This is one of the greatest sequels ever made, in my opinion. I don't think it's the best, but I think it's one of the best. I think it's just very well executed. I love the whole South African storyline. And even though this is only number 2, I do think this is the one where it has the best dynamic between Mel Gibson and Danny Glover. I think they have the best chemistry and dynamic in this movie. And I do think this has one of the best comedic gags out of the franchise, that being the fact that Danny Glover, that Murtaugh's daughter was in a condom commercial. And I just kind of love that whole comedic gag that goes on throughout this movie. The one thing that holds this back from the original is I haven't always been a big fan of Leo Getz, the Joe Pesci character. I think Joe Pesci's a phenomenal actor. I mean, he was my favorite performance in The Irishman. But overall, I think his character was almost a little too comedic, even though this is an action movie, a action comedy franchise. I do think his character was just a little too much for me. And even though I do enjoy all of the Lethal Weapon movies, and he's in 3 of them, I just wasn't always the biggest fan of his addition. I think he does a great job, and he has a lot of funny moments, but I kind of just prefer that original dynamic where it was just mainly Mel Gibson and Danny Glover. And coming in at number 1, I have the original Lethal Weapon. This is one of my favorite action movies of all time. I absolutely love this movie. I love Mel Gibson's role, especially when he's on the top of the building talking to the jumper guy, and just that whole dynamic. I just love his character in those types of situations. In this movie, they really go for that whole, is he crazy? Is he just pretending to be crazy? I love that whole situation that Mel Gibson's character has. And then Murtaugh's character is going for like the I'm too old for this stuff type of storyline, because I believe it's like his 50th birthday at the beginning of this movie. And then I just love the opening to this movie. You just hear Jingle Bell Rock, and just love kind of that subtle opening that it has. And it quickly lets you know that this does take place during Christmas time, and there's some Christmas decorations thrown in some of the houses that just add a nice visual aesthetic to me. And I just kind of love this movie. It has one of my favorite action scenes. Not necessarily one that I think is one of the greatest made action scenes, but as a personal favorite action scene. I just love that final conclusion and fight between Mel Gibson and Gary Busey. And I actually love Gary Busey in this movie as well. And you also have Tom Atkins in this movie. You just get like a nice kind of cast thrown in throughout this movie that I enjoy. And I think it has a great balance between comedy and action. And I think this is my favorite. I think this is the best buddy cop movie ever made, in my opinion. I love this movie. And on top of that, I'd probably honestly put Lethal Weapon 2 within the top 3 buddy cop movies as well. But I just love this original Lethal Weapon movie. And that is why it comes in at number 1. Thanks for watching this video. Go ahead and put your thoughts on both the Die Hard franchise and Lethal Weapon franchise. If you feel like it, go ahead and share your rankings of the two franchises in the comments down below. And comment why I'm stupid for putting Die Hard only at number 3. And also, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and smash that thumbs up icon, smash that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell as well. And I will return next time when I see you again. And also, have a very Merry Christmas.